Minister, you talked a lot about road congestion, about the importance of dealing with road congestion. You talked a lot about building roads. Apart from mentioning the Malcolm Turnbull Memorial Melbourne Airport link.
I don't think I used the word memorial.
I didn't hear you talk a lot about another way of easing congestion in cities, and that's improved public transport, and something you were asked about this morning on the ABC. That is the question of road user charges, which are possible if you improve the public transport system. Where do those things sit in your thinking?
Yeah, well, look, we are conducting some stakeholder engagement with road user charges at the moment. Obviously, with the number of automated vehicles, electric cars coming onto the market, I think Sabra Lane mentioned 12,000 in the next 12 months in our interview this morning. That's obviously got to be a consideration, because when you've got automated vehicles, electric vehicles on the roads, they're not paying fuel excise, and then, of course, who is going to actually pay for the roads of the future? That's got to be a consideration. But also it's got to be a consideration in context with cost of living. So there's no point in introducing road user charges. Some call them a carbon tax on cars, etc., etc. If it's going to push the price of actually trying to get from A to B through the roof. And it's particularly prevalent for regional commuters who travel more, who travel further, for whom getting to see a doctor and getting from one town to the next for sporting or business commitments or whatever the case might be, you don't want to punish them unfairly because they just need to use their petrol-based car. So all these things need to be taken into consideration in the context of road user charges. We're looking at it at the moment, as a responsible government would, and of course we'll be having more to say on that in the future.
And public transport?
Well, public transport is something that you know, is largely the domain as well of state governments, and so we'll work in conjunction with state governments. I love the front page of the Daily Telegraph just the other day where Gladys Berejiklian was there, and she was going to be the new congestion buster, and she certainly has, in conjunction with Melinda Pavey and Andrew Constance, her transport, road, etc. ministers. They've certainly done some good things working in conjunction with the federal government, but there's more to do in that regard as well.
And questions? Oh.
Hello, Philip. I just saw you there. Yeah. Welcome.
Yes, Adrian.
Yep, that's on.
Adrian Piani from AECOM, infrastructure firm. Just on the congestion, there's $1 billion in the budget for a congestion busting fund. Interesting having a chat. I guess I thought straight away that it's going to fund more, curb and gutter and roads, but actually there's opportunities to use it to reform policy, I think is what I'm hearing. So you did touch on that in your presentation. So just interested in your ideas about how you may change policy to change congestion.
Well, what we're trying to do is to build more and better roads, duplicate existing highways and byways to make sure that we get people in and out of the suburbs into the cities and back home again. And that just doesn't include road, it also includes rail. I loved recently where we went to Darwin and we're building a Barneston Boulevard, which is basically a replica running parallel to the Tiger Brennan Drive, and the journalists just couldn't get the fact that we were actually building this, as she put it, earlier than what was perhaps needed. And yes, Darwin's probably not anywhere near as congested as our other capital cities. That's actually well known. It probably doesn't also have the public transport that other capital cities has, and for good reason. But the fact is we're putting in those sorts of roads to ensure that we do look to the future, to ensure that we are building the infrastructure now that might not be needed right this very point in time, but people will be able to take advantage of in years to come. And that's an example of it. And whether it's Hobart, Adelaide, wherever, we're making sure that we get that sort of infrastructure down, but doing it in conjunction with the state governments and the planning departments thereof, because there's no point us just saying, look, this is just politically expedient for us to do so, because at the end of the day, better road and better rail advantages everybody. Whatever safe or marginal electorate you live in, everybody benefits, and that's what responsible governments do.
And a question here from...
Hi, it's Damien Graham from First State Super. Minister, I was just going to ask you about how you think about productivity gains for different types of infrastructure. So clearly infrastructure seems to be a great enabler of additional productivity gains. We're living in an environment where productivity gains are pretty hard to come by. So how do you calibrate productivity gains for different types of projects?
Well, you look at the, thanks Damien, you look at the Inland Rail project. Now that is going to benefit the state domestic product by $2.6 billion. Now that's a productivity gain that is enormous. That can only create more jobs in the regions, indeed more jobs in the capital cities. And that's just one example. Now, if you build better roads connecting regional communities, you ease congestion, that's got to bring about productivity gains because people feel happier and healthier going to and from work. That's got to lead to better productivity while they're at work. But also taking advantage of the free trade agreements we've got with those countries that I mentioned, but also the Trans-Pacific Partnership 11. Now that is a $13 trillion opportunity for Australian businesses and small businesses and farmers. Now I go around my electorate in the Riverina in southwest New South Wales and indeed in the Murrumbidgee irrigation area, and there's so many wineries and so many companies, little companies that are producing food and fibre, value adding them, and then now tapping into those market arrangements that we've got, using financing arrangements such as EFIC and others, using opportunities that they've got to grow their businesses. That's leading to productivity, and you know, the only thing that's holding them back at the moment is drought. The only thing that's holding them back is a dry spell. Everything else is put into place. We're opening up the opportunity, and when it rains, it's also going to benefit them enormously.
Hi, Sherelle Murphy from ANZ. In the 2017-18 budget, there was a substantial contribution towards infrastructure through grants, direct equity injections and direct capital spend by the Commonwealth itself. And then in this year's budget, we saw not much else on top of what was announced last year. I'm just wondering, was 2017-18 the big plan? Is that really we're only going to see dribs and drabs from there, or can we expect another big injection into that in the future?
Well, the 27-18 budget was an important one. It was, it was an important budget because it was making sure that we recalibrated what we were doing as far as infrastructure is concerned. We built on that in this year's budget, $24.5 billion worth of new projects and new money, laying down that 10-year pipeline of investment, laying down exactly what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. And as one project finishes, more are coming online. Of course, there's only sometimes in some areas where we are building, so the Beef Roads, the Northern Australian Roads project, and the new roads of strategic importance, $3.5 billion, $1.5 billion of which is dedicated to Northern Australia. Sometimes the weather doesn't always play that kindly in Northern Australia, and nor is it possible to always get the people to actually construct the roads. So we need to also take those sorts of measures in mind, but we're guaranteeing that we're building on year. Our budgets are making sure that we continue that pipeline of investment and rolling out the projects, and wherever you go in this nation, whether it's a capital city or indeed a remote or regional part of the country, there are witches' hats and people with lollipop signs which have stop and go on either side of them. There's work happening. There's cranes in the air. There's track being laid down as far as steel from, it's going to be the equivalent of 5 Sydney Harbour bridges from Brisbane to Melbourne. We're getting on with the job of building the infrastructure that we need, want, demand and expect and deserve.
And we've got a final question from this side of the room.
Thanks. Megan Motto from Consult Australia. You spoke about innovative financing mechanisms, and Consult Australia is a great fan of using the breadth and the full gamut of innovative financing mechanisms. One of the great success stories of your government has been the asset recycling scheme that unleashed significant financing into the infrastructure sector without obviously asking for any preemptive response to the Great Reform Report written by Infrastructure Australia only a couple of weeks ago. Is there any thought process with regards to reinvigorating a similar type scheme to incentivise the states to really reuse that productive asset capital back into their market?
Yeah, well, look, that's a good question. I'm not quite sure all the states came on board as enthusiastically as some other states in that regard, and that money was put on the table for whichever states wanted to do it. There's always going to be those opportunities. I don't know, speaking to the New South Australian Premier, Stephen Marshall, and his vision for not just Adelaide, but indeed the hills and beyond. It's really exciting to see a Premier who wants to reinvigorate the central business district of Adelaide, and some of the things that he's got in mind, using smarter financing, using smarter equity investments and the like, and making sure that we do turn over assets that perhaps are in need of a bit of a sale or a refresh or whatever the case might be, is really good to see. We've seen how Will Hodgman has turned around Tasmania. 4 years ago, went to Tasmania and it was at the bottom of every economic league table in Australia. Not anymore. It's really revitalised, helped by the Museum of Old and New Art, but also helped by a real innovative way of approaching investment, approaching infrastructure and getting on with the job of doing it.
And just before I let you go, one final question from me. I'm interested in your views, the CEDA report, the Community Pulse report, and some of the messaging of this conference is about the economic disconnect, that people aren't necessarily feeling the gains of having such a long run of a good economy. What do you think is behind that?
Well, social media gives everybody the licence to say what they think, and there's often a cynicism in the air about politicians and politics generally, and not helped sometimes by our media, perish the thought, indeed. But, when you do look at Australia, and if you've been overseas for any given time and you fly back into Sydney, it's wonderful how clean and fresh that city looks, and you see the Harbour Bridge, you see the Opera House, and then you go out to the regions. We live in the best country in the world. There's no question about it. I just think we need to tell ourselves more often how lucky we are, and we need to be a little bit more positive in our thinking. I suppose governments and politicians basically cop a lot of the blame for having that disconnect. There are some sobering truths in the report. I look forward to tucking myself up into bed about midnight tonight and getting my teeth right into it.
Well, Minister, on a very busy day, the last parliamentary week, before you take a break over the winter to go and commute.
A break where I'll be working, every day.
Commune with your constituents and set some policy and maybe fix roads. We really do appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lyndall. Thank you very much.